first up, let's talk about what you do. You're currently Executive Director of Linux International. What exactly is that?
Linux International was started in 1994 as a vendor organization. The person who started it, a person by the name of Patrick de Cruz, was in Australia, and he saw that there were lots of Linux user groups starting up, but he felt that there was a need for a vendor organization that could help business people understand what the uses of Linux in particular and open source in general were for business and the advantages of using it. Helped to describe things like the licensing, helped them to understand that while the software was free as in freedom, it was not necessarily free as in beer, and that we wanted to be able to have people make money providing service rather than have them make money providing simply products.
A lot of people, as you rightfully said, think free is free beer. How do you change people's mindsets when it comes to that?
I think the real problem there is that people are only concentrating on the traditional ways of thinking about software. And when I say traditional, it's ironic in the fact that in the period between 1943 and 1977, there really wasn't any such thing as shrink-wrap software. There wasn't the number of computers necessary to sustain a mass production of software. And software was actually written individually for people's needs, with a few exceptions. So the concept of going down to your local store and picking up your computer and picking up your 5 or 6 packages of software was not possible unless, of course, picking it up meant that you could lift a 480-ton computer and you had 3-phase power in your house along with water cooling. But the period between 1977 and 1990, we saw a number of computers start up which were lower in price and obviously able to be purchased by somebody at a store, and the mass production of software came in. Now, what people really want, in our estimation, is really service. People have a problem to solve, and they want that problem solved in a way that fits them best. And that brings us back to having the bulk of software being able to be available over the net. The software that you typically would pay a company like Microsoft to produce for you in the form of, say, OpenOffice is available over the net, and then you pay your money to have it tailored exactly to what your needs are. Whether that be something simple like simply fixing a bug in a time frame that makes sense to you, or having an extension made so it be able to fit into your business better. And that, we think, is very valuable. We think it's actually almost priceless.
Maddog, let's talk about the contention about the cost of ownership between proprietary software and open source software. What are your thoughts about that?
Let me illustrate that with a small company in Brazil that wanted to investigate the rainforests for new plastics, new medicines. The software, the proprietary software that was available for them to do that was only available in English and was extremely expensive. It was only available from a company in the United States. Nobody in the small company spoke English. They all spoke Portuguese. And when they went and approached this company to have the software transferred or translated into Portuguese, the company said, no, it's not in our best business interest. So the value of that company's software to the small company was zero. In any case, the little company said, let's see if we can have an open source developer duplicate this software, and if we can have them produce it so it prompts in Portuguese so we can use it. And they were able to do that. And the software now allowed them to exist as a small company. So to this small company, the value of the open source software was actually infinite, because without it, they would not exist. With it, they could. So the total cost of ownership, unfortunately, has been taken to be if the software exists and if it does something according to what we want it to, how much does it cost us to buy it, install it, and train our people to use it? Not the question of does it actually meet our needs best and how well does it allow us to do our jobs? That's a different question that people hardly ever answer. And that's the value of open source, because you can tailor it to meet your needs instead of what the manufacturer thinks your needs are.
A lot of end users who haven't come across Linux or perhaps have heard about it, they don't really quite understand that it could be quite easy to use. How would you respond to that?
Well, I would suggest that they simply take a little time out and try it. Either by perhaps coming to an event like Linux World and taking a look at it, or if they're in the case of a company that is, in a large city or something like that, perhaps finding their local Linux user group and attending a meeting of that, or they could perhaps visit a university or ask for some consulting firm to come in and present them a presentation on what Linux is like. I think that today Linux is shipping on about 1/3 of all the server systems that are shipping. Another third is proprietary and commercial Unix systems, and another third is Microsoft products of different types. Today it's used on most of the supercomputers which are being developed, and quite a few of them which are already in use. This coming December, there will be a supercomputer of 10,000 processors which will be using Linux to help predict the weather as part of NASA's ongoing studies. That will be the largest computer in the world. In things like embedded systems, like things like TV recorders, cameras, things like that, Linux is currently the third most used operating system in new designs. And so the desktop is actually the last marketplace that we have to penetrate. And IDC tells us that Linux is now outselling Apple systems on the desktop. That does not mean that we're taking those systems away from Apple. It means that we are taking them away from another large computer company that we may have heard of. And plus, in the emerging economies, Linux is very strong on the desktop. So I would suggest to people that they may want to take a look at it, perhaps pick up a magazine on it, or go down to a local bookstore and find a book on Linux. Usually that has a CD in the back of it that goes along with the book and allows you to install Linux on a system, either one that already supports Windows, and you can have it dual boot. You can choose either Linux or a Windows system, or perhaps on a system that you no longer need. Linux works very well on low-end Pentium systems and even 486s. Some people even run it on 386s and systems without memory management.
One thing I want to touch upon with you, Maddog, is the aspect of a number of different distros that distribute Linux. And one of the contentious issues that people talk about is the fact that they're all packaged slightly differently. Distros might put certain files in different folders. Now, how do you react to that in terms of providing perhaps a standard for consumers to work with?
There is a standards group called the Free Standards Group, www.freestandards.org. And they are in the process, and have been for some time, in developing a standard which will allow each distribution to be different in the services that it provides for people, but yet be the same for an application that's going to be installed. So if you were to develop your application on one distribution which was Free Standards compliant, you would then be able to deploy it on any other distribution which was Free Standards compliant. And they just came out with their latest standard called FSG 2.0, and they are now taking that out to the distributions and asking them to do the conformance testing, and they're taking it to the ISVs to allow the ISVs to also be conformant. Is this a perfect solution currently? The answer is no. There may be some issues with it, but the issues allow the ISVs to fix the problems with a simple bug fix as opposed to having to redesign their application. And we continue to make the testing and the standards better and better, and we continue to make the conformance of it better and better. So we invite people to join in this free standards effort to be able to say, well, these are the interfaces that are important to me, and therefore these are the interfaces that we standardize on next. Now, the difference between having a standard like that and having a single distribution allows somebody to innovate in the things that are not important to the ISVs, that are not important to the application vendors, but are important to end users, such as the ease of installation, such as the ease of graphical systems administration, such as how you package up the software to fit on a system, whether it's going to be a scientific system or whether it's going to be a business system or whether it's going to be a general purpose system. We still do not know what is the perfect system, and therefore we still need to have, we need the ability to innovate inside of that. And we also need competition, so that if one vendor decides, well, I'm going to change the way I license my software, you can go to another vendor and know that the things that are important to you, your investment in your applications and your investment in your training for your people are protected, but yet you still can have leverage over the vendors in how much they charge for their software and how much they charge for their services.
So you're saying that certain vendors are perhaps taking on a proprietary mindset with regards to locking in certain users using their distro versus others?
That's possible whenever you don't have that type of a setup. Whenever you say that is a particular distribution which is a standard, what we call a de facto standard, simply because it has the largest volume. Okay? If you say instead that the standard is actually a written standard which every vendor can then meet and provide, then that guarantees the customer that they're not going to be locked into a particular vendor.
Would you say that perhaps in the Linux and open source community, there is a problem with regards to finding a standard?
I don't think that there's a problem with regards to finding a standard, because in reality, most of the Linux distributions use the same source code tree of the kernel and a lot of the other applications at the same time. The question is, when do the different distributions deliver that particular code to the end user customer, and in what organization? I believe that what the LSB is trying to do is to say that any given point in time, if you deliver a certain set of functionality to the end user and to the ISV, then you will be able to meet that standard and the applications will run. It's not an issue of how the different libraries do their work. It's the issue of exactly what work do the libraries do and at what time, and what functionality and what features does the application need at any given period of time. And if you lock that in, if you say at a particular period of time, this is the functionalities needed, then you can go ahead and standardize on that. But that still gives plenty of room for the community to say, we can make the library faster, we can make it smaller, use up less memory, we can make it more robust, it breaks fewer times. All these different things are actually innovations that are very valuable to people.
If you get software for free, then how does the development of that software get paid for?
Well, there's a variety of reasons why people write free software, and I like to relate this back to our artist friends, which I mentioned. A lot of times people write free software because they say, I need the software myself in what I do. And because I do not have a business of selling this particular type of software, why shouldn't I give it away to somebody else who could also use it? The next thing they say is, well, if I'm going to give it away to somebody who can also use it, maybe this person can also help me improve it. And if I do it all myself, well, then I have to do all the work myself. But if I allow other people to help me improve it, I may only have to do a small portion of the work. And maybe the work that I don't like doing, the other people find very satisfying and very interesting. And so as a community, you actually produce better and more software than you do as only an individual. A friend of mine who was a systems administrator for a large company said that he would go home at night, sit on the couch beside his wife, and sit there and write little shell scripts and programs that would help him do his job. He would then send them out to the free software community. The next day he would go into work and find that 10,000 other people had been doing the same thing. And he said to me that this is an amplifier of what I can do, because if I had to do all this by myself, I would never get it done. The third reason why people might write free software is because they want to improve their capabilities of writing software. And by writing software and exposing it to all sorts of other people who are experts, they get feedback on how well they write software. They also write it because they may get recognition. Certainly a lot of the free software people have been asked to go around the world and talk to people about the software projects that they've started or that they're working on. And so they get recognition from their peers as to how good their software is and how many people are using it. And you could compare this to the artist taking their piece of art down to an art show and having it graded or commented on by other artists. Finally, there are people who say, well, I'm a consultant or I'm working for a large company, and the fact that I write this free software gives me recognition inside of the programming community, and perhaps somebody will hire me to do a job. Or maybe somebody says, I like your software, but I don't really understand how to use it to its maximum, so would you come in to my company and let me pay you a couple days of consulting so that you can tell my people how to use it better. Or I like your software and I would like to have this new thing added to it, and you probably will add it in your own time, but if I pay you money, you can add it in my time, the time that is necessary for me to have this new feature. And this is a lot of what the larger companies are doing currently to a lot of the free software. They say, yes, we understand that maybe in 2 years this new feature will go in, but if we pay you to do it, we get it in our time frame, and then we can utilize this free software to do business for ourselves. So there's a lot of reasons. And finally, some of the larger companies, such as IBM and Hewlett-Packard, they used to produce their own Unix systems, their own operating systems, and this might cost them anywhere between $200 and $300 million a year to have the number of engineers necessary to do this. They found out that by using Linux and open source, they can go in and basically get the same operating system, but the number of engineers which they have to have are significantly reduced. And at most, they need some engineers to make sure that the operating system works well on their particular piece of hardware. So they hire an open source developer such as, I won't mention any names, but they hire somebody and put them on their staff. And it's basically an inexpensive way of having a really good operating system. Make sure that it fits your hardware. And they allow the person, of course, to do work for the rest of the open source community, which the open source community greatly appreciates. So these are some of the ways you can make money.
What is your opinion on the SCO case against Linux?
I think that after, I don't know how many years of this, I've lost track of SCO trying to make the case that some of their code is actually in Linux or that they own something of Linux. And every time they try and hold up some piece of code and say, look, this is our code. And the Linux and the free and open source community kind of laughs at them and says, no, this is where it came from. And if anything, SCO took that code from Linux. I don't even think about it anymore. It's just something that has to grind its way through the courts. I think that if SCO is not very, very careful, they may find that the code that they purport to be their own actually comes from a wide variety of sources. And if I was the judge, I would simply look at it and say, I think that everything that SCO owns actually belongs in the public domain, and that SCO might actually lose all of their intellectual property and their company be worth virtually zero. And if I could prove that they knew that already, I might find that the Security and Exchange Commission of the United States of America would have a very interesting case against the people who are major stockholders of and boards of directors of SCO. So there's nothing to say that they might not be right, but I don't think that they are. So, and I think that the fact that companies like IBM and Hewlett-Packard and Novell are all telling their customers, go ahead and use Linux, if they even thought for the fraction of a moment that SCO had a case, they would not say this. They would not tell their customers to go ahead and use free and open source, because their customers would be very irritated with them later on. So I think that it's basically SCO against the world, and I think SCO is going to lose. Big time.
Interesting times ahead.
Yes.
Maddog, another question I'd like to ask you is, people buy proprietary software all the time, but what are the hidden costs associated with proprietary software?
Well, it's interesting. You live in a country that the business language is predominantly English. I live in a country where we hardly ever speak anything but English. But when you go to countries outside of those, there's a whole different flavor of things. Colombia, for instance, their major language is Spanish, but they have native Indian tribes that speak 60 different languages. India has 2 different character sets, 18 different official languages, and 5,000 unofficial languages. There are some countries that have a large illiteracy rate. And so how do you get people to use computers that can't read or write in any language? And these are things that large companies simply can't afford to put money into, because the resultant sales that they would get are so small that they can't convince their stockholders that this is something that they should be doing. The open source community can take people who are interested in solving those types of problems and put them on them outside of the mainstream development, and therefore be able to solve these types of problems. There are other things, military instances, things where governments have to consider how long should your government survive, and is your government capable of continuing with its computer systems when in time of war, for instance, or in time of embargo. Well, what happens when a company goes out of business? What happens if a computer company goes out of business and it's that company's email system that you're using to run your government? Can you maintain that yourselves without the source code of that email system? And if people say that, well, that's why I pick a large company like Microsoft to be able to run my company or buy my software from, because they're a large company, well, then I can answer back and I can say Wang or Prime or Data General or Digital Equipment Corporation or Compaq, which were all large companies in their time, but which no longer exist. And so I think that a lot of countries and cities, Munich, for example, said, yes, the price of the Microsoft solution may actually be cheaper than the open source solution, but we have to think of the long-term strategic issues that have to do with the longevity of companies and the ability to maintain it for a city whose new town hall is 700 years old.
Maddog, thank you so much for joining us on the show. It's been really interesting, and good luck with your adventures.
Okay, and I'm happy to say that I went to South Africa in 2001 to talk about open source. I went in 2004 to talk about open source, and I hope to get back there soon again to talk about it.
We're looking forward to having you back. Thank you.
Thank you.